You're listening to Tech Recruit, a podcast that educates talent acquisition and recruitment professionals on innovation to attract talent across all industries. We're glad you're here. Welcome to Tech Recruit Podcast. Today on our show, we have as a very special guest, Mr. Jim Stroud.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Jim. You have a lot of projects that you're working on, and I have known, not personally, but I've known of you for over a decade. When I first started in recruitment, tell me about some of the other projects that you're working on.
Well, presently I'm working on the Jim Stroud Podcast, which is on, you can find it on iTunes, you can find it on Anchor and several other places. You can also, of course, find it on jimstroud.com, which is my main site there. That is the project that's keeping me the most busy these days. I'm also thinking somewhat about another book, not quite sure yet. I may or may not do that this year, I don't know. But the podcast is what really has me going right now.
So on your podcast, what are some of the topics that you discuss?
Sure. The podcast is actually a slight divergence from the recruiting things I normally talk about, although I do touch on recruiting from time to time on the podcast. This is more about futurist issues. So I'll talk about technology and how it will affect society overall. I may talk about my latest podcast is would you ride in a driverless car? You know, a lot of startups and companies are spending a lot of money developing this technology, but a lot of surveys out there say people are just not going to ride in them. And so I talk about that in different ways companies could perhaps persuade people to ride in a driverless car. Yeah, so that's one.
What is the consensus there?
Most people don't want to ride in them because they feel that they're not safe enough. You know, they generally point to situations like with the Uber robot car last year had killed someone, which if a human being had been driving, they would have easily have swerved behind them. There's also this angst that people tend to have towards this type of technology. There are reports of people attacking these autonomous cars which are owned by Waymo, which is a Google company, attacking it, slashing the tires, throwing bricks and rocks at it because they just don't want these robot cars in their neighborhood because they fear for the children who may be walking around. And they just don't like the very presence of these autonomous cars. They see them as an existential threat. And it goes beyond, and I tweeted this earlier today, it goes beyond just cars because there are companies out there that are working on robot scooters and bikes, which aren't a real threat to anybody really. And people are attacking them and setting them on fire as well. So it's really interesting.
It sounds like people with a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah.
Anti-technologists or something of that nature, but.
Yeah, there's actually in my latest podcast, I talk about the phenomenon and I relate it to the Luddite Revolution, which you may or may not be familiar with. For those who are not familiar with it, the Luddite Revolution comes from the 19th century during the Industrial Revolution. And that is when cutting edge technology was introduced to factories like the spinning jenny, other technologies like the steam engine and the cotton gin. They're all coming out around this time. And so if you were someone who developed textiles or clothes, materials to make clothes with, then it would take you forever to put all this together. But with these new technologies like the spinning jenny, someone who had very little experience making clothes could take that device and make a bunch of clothes. So why would I hire you if you're a skilled worker if I can hire this low skilled person and just buy this machine? So people were so upset by this technology that they would break into factories and with sledgehammers destroy them, or set factories on fire. And it took military intervention and a lot of legal cases and in some cases some executions to squash that. And so when I read about people setting these autonomous vehicles on fire, it reminded me of that Luddite movement from the 19th century.
I can't help but apply it to the recruitment industry.
Yes.
I mean, if you had that same parallel with AI and chatbots, what might that look like?
That will look like a lot of nervous recruiters who I think would be nervous unnecessarily, because although automation can and will automate certain tasks, I don't see it eradicating recruiters totally from the equation, because human beings want to converse with a human being. There are different quirks and personalities and gut checks that you just can't program into a machine. So I don't see AI removing recruiters from the equation. I see it helping recruiters to do their job more efficiently and at a higher scale.
I absolutely agree with you. So recruiters, don't go attacking any chatbots.
No. That reminds me of a cool tool. I'll introduce you to these people if you want.
Okay.
There's this tool I did a demo of it, and it's called Hone It. Have you heard of it?
Yes, they're gonna sponsor my next event.
Oh, sweet!
Like, it's such a great idea, right? This is how I keep notes. I mean, just awful. And then I write like all in the margins and all over, you know. And I wish I could say into my notebook, Jim Stroud, and it pulled out all our notes, you know, and that's what Hone It does. Love that. I'm very curious about how you found yourself in the recruitment industry and and we'll get to the establishment of where you're at tonight or today. But how did you start in recruiting?
Well, like most things in my life, it started with a girl. Before, well, at one point, my career aspirations were to become a famous screenplay writer, and I was in school to be a film director, and so I would make short films and produce music videos, that kind of thing. And I wasn't setting Hollywood on fire at the time. And so the woman I was dating at the time, who I thought I would marry, I didn't, but at the time I thought we were, she said, as only she can, if you're going to be with me, you need to get a real job. And so I decided to listen, because I wanted to keep dating her at the time. And so I went into the Career Center at the college I attended, Georgia State. And there was this ad that said, get paid to surf the internet. And at the time, my knowledge of the internet was very limited, because way back then, the internet was just America Online, and everybody had a disk everywhere, you know. And so a friend of mine had shown me the internet on his computer. He was a system administrator at the school. And he pressed a few buttons down, and a picture of a woman in a bikini popped up. And I said, wow, what's that? He said, that's the internet. The internet is cool. So when I saw a sign, yeah, so when I saw a sign that said, get paid to serve the internet, I was like, sure, why not, right? So I go down there, and the company was MCI, which was a telecommunications company. And I asked them, I said, so what exactly do you want people to do? Because I'm sure it's not, you know, what I'm thinking the job is. And she said, well, this is a job where people are looking for resumes online. And I said, really? She said, yeah, people are posting their resumes on websites and posting them to online career sites and such. And that just blew my mind. I had no idea. I said, really? People just put it on the internet somewhere? And she said, yeah. So I said, so how do you find these people? And so she switched the topic. And I said, oh, you don't know how to do it. Well, that makes sense, because you're trying to hire somebody. So when the interview was over, I went home and I went to Yahoo, which is where Google was back then. Yeah. And I remember reading the help menu, figuring out, well, how do I use a search engine? Because I didn't even know that much, right? So I read through that, figured it out, did a search, and sent 3 resumes to her within like 2 hours of my interviewing her. And I said, is this what you want? And she said, hired. And I've been doing it ever since. That's how I got started.
So you had an interview with MCA, which Coincidentally, my mom worked at MCI too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So you guys could have some good talks probably like,
Oh, sure.
The alumni, the MCI alumni.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. And then you got on, you figured out how to do searching, and it's just kind of blossomed and grown from there.
Yeah, I was really in the right time, right spot at the right time. MCI was cutting edge for a lot of companies in terms of using the internet to source candidates. Sourcing itself was really a new phenomenon to a lot of people back then. It predates AIRS, which a lot of people back then were going to AIRS to learn how to do this kind of thing. And so people inside the company were curious as to what we were doing on the internet all day. And so I would take it upon myself just to train people and say, well, this is how we do what we do. And I would just show people inside the company. And that blossomed to me giving presentations at different recruiter groups in the city. And it just sort of grew from there. You know, I've always been sort of an open book, so to speak, in sharing information. So it just sort of grew from there. Eventually, MCI was purchased by WorldCom, and I ended up going to a search firm, Atlanta Technology Group, which was an agency where we staffed startup companies. And so went from there, eventually left there to go to Siemens, from Siemens to Google, from Google to Microsoft, eventually to Randstad.
So in your career path, you started with this passion of writing screenplays.
Yeah.
Right. And that brought you to when you're working at a company to doing training where you're kind of like pivoted to the other side where you were on stage giving presentations. And I can see how it lend itself hand in hand. But did you find when you were doing speaking in front of people, did you find that to be rewarding personally? Did you gravitate towards that?
Oh yeah, very much so, because I sort of saw it as my art, so to speak. So if you ever see any of my presentations or anyone suffers through one of my presentations, I try to be very creative. I usually, I might do it in the comic book kind of form, or I may have original art or different pictures, just make it really, really different. And I like when I present the gratification of getting an immediate response, So I will put videos together because I like hearing the feedback from that, but it's not like doing it live, because you never know if you say something really funny, for sure when you're doing it live as opposed to doing it on a video. So I like the immediate gratification of it.
So yeah, that's a whole different animal doing things live and getting that sort of response from it. And it takes a certain personality. So definitely good on you. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, right now I am consulting. So I've been taking on different consulting projects for different companies, helping them with their sourcing strategies, evaluating their products, things like that.
And so in consulting, are you doing that through Randstad?
No. Presently, no longer with Randstad, sort of on my own at this present time, although I am filling different offers and opportunities. It's sort of an interesting situation because once I started letting people know that I was open, I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of opportunities presented to me, and I've been evaluating them, but I haven't found that just right one just yet. So that's why I'm still consulting now.
I know that whenever I'm speaking with a potential speaker for our conference, LAX Tech Recruit, you often come up in those conversations. And I've made an introduction to some of those heads of talent acquisition in maybe offering some of the services that you have with your huge background and your immense experience in working with all the companies that you've been with. It's just such a value add. What are some of the services, if I were to speak with a head of talent acquisition or with that, and I would imagine that would be the person or the head of HR, what are the type of services or the consulting positions that are of interest to you?
To me, probably creating sourcing strategies, looking at the data and trying to figure out the best way to source the individuals, source people. Also, being a Mr. Fix-It, so to speak,
Yeah.
where I would evaluate the different recruiting processes and sourcing methods and say, okay, this is what you're doing now. Let me suggest some other things that'll make your processes more efficient.
Okay, so I love both these topics because I feel like I saw you speak recently, and the video was posted and people were just reposting it, and I feel like it almost went viral. It was these tips and tricks that you were providing, hacks on sourcing, and I want to talk a little bit about that and some of the tips that you offered there.
Okay. Well, sourcing has always been a passion of mine, so sharing the latest and greatest of that is always interesting. I think the video you probably were referring to might have been around sourcing people from the news, because I gave a webinar of that recently for Hiring Solve. And the point I was making in that webinar video presentation was that there are a lot of reporters constantly talking to people of all sorts all over the world, and these are the people that you may want to recruit. So I was showing as an example, if you're looking for, say, a software engineer, a search string you might use is he or she, and said or according to, and then put in a job title like software engineer. And you'll find different articles online where reporters have been quoting software engineers in relation to some topic they are reporting on, and you can not only find people online that way, but if you x-ray certain newspapers or certain news sites, you could find people in certain locations as well. And so, and the third thing that people like about this strategy was that once you've done this search once, you could automate it through Google Alerts. So let's say you find a really good search string that you really like. And I have several examples. I can share them with you. You can share with your audience later if you like, maybe in the description. But once you set up the search, you set up a Google alert on it, and then you have once a week or once a month, however way you set it up, it would come to your email automatically. So you're pretty much, set it, source one time and continually get results to you on a weekly basis for free.
Hold on, my computer is...
Sure. It's one advantage of doing things live. You never know what's going to happen in the background. So I remember one time I was doing something live, and I thought it was a mistake, but I think it was planned. A flash mob came in, and they started dancing and singing in the background. So when you did that, I was sort of waiting for the flash mob to come in singing and dancing, but not this time, unfortunately.
I have had that as a dream of mine to do at my conference. Like everybody's just sitting there like, oh, I'm going to listen to Jim Stroud. Where's he at? He's going to be talking, right? And then all of a sudden people just stand up and start dancing, and like you come out, like do a little jig. Oh my gosh. Oh, please. You want to talk about creativity? We could have some stories. So that is, okay. So I think one of my favorite things about this door that has opened for me in developing the conference is all the amazing people who I've met. And those are people who are sharing ideas and knowledge versus keeping it behind this gate and keeping it all for themselves. And when I first started in recruitment, I was working for a Fortune 500 staffing agency that's very well known. And I got some of the best training there. But there was very much you don't on LinkedIn, you don't connect with other recruiters because they'll get part of your network. And you don't network with them. And I feel either there has been a shift or that people are more apt at sharing. But in saying that too, I feel like this is something you've always done. But maybe I want to ask your perspective on that. Do you feel that recruiters are now more open? Do you feel you're more open? What are your thoughts on that?
I think recruiters are more open from the standpoint, if you look on different Facebook groups, because it used to be that a lot of recruiters will get together on LinkedIn groups and talk, but over the past year or so, everyone's sort of migrated to Facebook for whatever reason. And so a lot of recruiter groups and Facebook recruiters will exchange ideas and talk and different things like that. I think early on in my career, the culture here, at least here in Atlanta, was always sharing. The recruiters here, we always shared tips and tricks and what we were doing. It was just the culture here. But I noticed that when I would travel up north, it was more keeping the tips and tricks close to the vest, you know. But I think it eventually changed when people who were sharing, like maybe myself or Dean DaCosta and Glenn Cathy, and Gary Jacobs, so many others out there, they start posting out so many of their tips and tricks and posting them online that it sort of just changed the culture, you know?
Yeah.
Because the more it's shared, the more people would say, oh, I like that, you know, but I also did this with it. So it also perpetuated more learning amongst us. So I think all the sharing really changed the culture.
So the tips and tricks that you offer are sometimes just like, oh my gosh, those are and they're like the news, looking at, you know, the news and creating that search, but creating the search alert, that's brilliant. Oh, that's so good. That's yummy.
It's another $20 I owe you. I'm going to go broke.
I'm just putting my court. When you and I first spoke,
yeah.
I have a notebook that I was just scribbling down all the things that we talked about, and I filled up, I think, 3.5 pages of notes.
I was talking a lot.
But it was such valuable information. And, you know, we were talking about the conference, and we were talking about how you become an influencer and how you get your content out there and the type of technologies that you can use. And you have a blog, and you have a website, and you have a podcast. And, you know, I think it's very easy to be like, you know, I don't want to reveal how I'm doing these things because I need to do it all for myself. I want to gain all the traffic. But you were just so open about some of the things that I could do to enhance my exposure. And so I'm just really grateful for that, and I appreciate that you were open to doing that, and I hope I can give back to you in a way, and I know that we'll have the opportunity to do that. I want to talk about your process. So okay. When you're consulting with a company, and so I mentioned that I speak with a lot of chief people officers and heads of talent acquisition, for my conference, and, you know, talking about their knowledge. But I often come across that maybe they're not doing something, or maybe that's an initiative. You know, I've spoken with, I've spoken about what technologies they're using. Or like, oh, we're kind of like in the middle of like developing that. Do you know anybody? When you are consulting with a company about their technologies, what are some of the things that you've seen that maybe a case study of something you've helped them
with? That's a loaded question because I'm not really allowed to give details. I'm trying to think in generalities here. Okay, so if someone has said, this is a technology that I'm thinking of using, I'll first ask them, what technology have you been using so far? Because sometimes people will actually need a technology to do something, and then sometimes they just want a technology because it's the latest and greatest thing. And so it's a matter of, you can use this new technology to do whatever, but do you realize that you already have this other technology in place that you're not leveraging correctly? So I first look and see, how are they leveraging the technology they already have, because they could just not be using it to the hilt. Yeah. And in cases when it happens, it saves them a lot of money, and then they take me to dinner. Yeah. But in cases where I can say, okay, you're using this outdated technology, these are the reasons why you want to change your technology. It's never because it's the latest and greatest. It's because compelling stories around it. You know, if candidate X comes to your company now using the technology you use, this is what likely will happen. But if you use this new technology, this is what will likely happen. And this is how their life will get better. And this is how your life will get better. Just telling requirements or this is the latest and greatest, that doesn't connect with people. You got to have a compelling story, you know, something that they can relate to. And if you have enough story that's relatable to them, then they'll accept the reasons why you're proposing that product.
So in stepping into a situation, being able to assess where they're at, what their needs are, I imagine beyond the implementation, there's a lot of hand-holding and getting them through the training and up-ramp, to get them to a point where they're using it in an efficient way and in a complete way. Do you assist with that as well?
I have on occasion, not a lot, but I have on occasion. I've been in situations where a company has acquired a new tool. The salesperson did a really good job selling the tool to the person, to the company. But the people who will be working with the tool on a day-to-day basis, they were not fans. They felt like it was forced upon them. So one thing I suggested to someone is that before you acquire a new tool, poll your people to see if they see the value of the tool. Explain to them how this will make their day better, make it easier for them. I think selling them on the tool instead of forcing the tool on them because the salesperson convinced you, I think it's in the company's best interest to do the due diligence with the people who will be working on the tool every day and saying, this is what we're thinking of doing. This is the tool we want to buy. This is how we think it's going to serve you. What do you think? Because all too often you have to battle, is a tool really useful? And then more importantly, you have to battle the cultural shift, because someone who may be recruiting for so many years, used to doing things a certain way, they don't want to change what they're doing. So you can give them the best possible tool, but if they're so used to doing it a certain way, they're going to rebel against that tool. And if you spent millions of dollars on it, you're going to be a little angry about that. And then you might think, okay, maybe off with their heads. Let me get somebody else who will do this, because that's millions of dollars. But in the process of that, you're wasting time and wasting money, and it's a bit of a mess. So hopefully I answered that question. But I would say make sure that the people using the tool are on board with it first.
I can't think of a better person. I would want to come and assess the technologies that I'm using and help me identify a technology that would be great for my company, especially if you're looking at the different elements of that. And so you're taking all that experience, I think that would be a tremendous value add. So I think doing the consulting is perfect fit for you. And
thank you.
I wanted to ask too, tell me about your resume forensics.
Oh, yeah. That's one of 5 books that I've written, and it's one of the more popular ones because it's more of a training manual in a sense. If you are a novice or an intermediate sourcer, you can still get something from this. Basically, it's a back to basics kind of approach. Shows you how to build a Boolean string, how to find free resumes on Google predominantly, but also on Yahoo and Bing. Also talks a little bit about how to have a productive intake meeting with a manager as well. One thing that I think some recruiters do, or a lot of recruiters and sourcers do, they become order takers. Yep. And they just say, whatever the manager wants, I'll find that perfect person who has exactly 2 years in this, exactly 3 years of that kind of thing. And they don't come to the meeting with what I call pre-search, the research you do before you start researching the different candidates. And that can include looking at rivals in the space. It can look at how many people are actually in the talent market who have a particular skill set. And then coming to the manager and saying, okay, before you start telling me everything you want specifically, let me give you an idea of what's really happening in the space before we even begin, so that we can get some agreement on what you want and also what you will settle for. And even with all of that, you don't really know what the manager wants until they start interviewing people. Because a manager could say, I want 2 years of that, 3 years of that. But then when you listen to them talking to a candidate, then you realize, oh, you told me you wanted this, but this person has that. So what makes this person so special that you accept them as opposed to just telling me, parenthetically, have me waste my time, So you don't really get that. I think sometimes hiring managers don't know how to articulate that. So even with all the research and the pre-search, you still have to sit in and listen in on the first few interviews at the very least to get an understanding of what they want.
It is one of the biggest things I feel that comes up is the pushback on your hiring managers.
Yeah.
And I think you alluded to this too. Hiring managers don't always know how to interview. They don't always know completely what they're looking for. You have a sort of idea, and then you put the skill sets out there, and maybe it shifts and changes. And so I wonder too, like when you are approaching that sort of intake meeting, is there a certain mindset that you feel that you would recommend recruiters have?
Yeah, I would recommend having what I call a sourcing service level agreement in mind with them, saying that I agree to find people for you, but I'm only going to send you 3 at a time, or 3 max, and then once you have looked at these and give me a compelling reason why you want or don't want, I'm not going to see you any more beyond that. And if you do not respond by a certain amount of time, I'm going on to the next rec or to the next manager. That shows that I'm respecting your time and you're respecting my time. That also gives a little bit of extra pressure to that recruiter or sourcer to give that manager quality every time. Because if you're only going to give them 3 or 4 at a time, they have to be right on the money, or very close to it. Because if they're not, then the manager is going to devalue their opinion of your emails, and to make it even harder for them, for you to work a deal with them as far as looking at your candidate. And then I also would have in my mind, okay, let's set schedule some dates in advance, right? And I'll say, okay, I'm going to have candidates for you in 2 weeks, and we're going to have this date set, and then we're going to have another date set 3 weeks from that kind of thing. And if I have people for you, we'll meet at the time. But if we don't have anybody specifically for you, then you get 30 minutes back in your day, or whatever the case may be. By having those preset interview times or resume review times, that saves a lot of headache and hassle of, are you free now? Are you free now? Are you free now? I sent this to you. Just book some dates ahead of time and know that you're going to have a meeting at that particular time with them. You got to think time savings. You got to think efficiency. And then you also have to think about each individual hiring manager, because even though you may have one rec, say software engineer rec, and you're dealing with multiple managers, each manager has their own spin of what they're looking for in their mind, whether they articulate it or not. So you may have one manager, manager may prefer people from more established companies like Microsoft, or Google, and they want somebody who's been there like 5 years, and they think they have such a high esteem for the technology and the people who work there, that's the kind of people they really want. But another manager who wants the same rec say, you know what, I want somebody who's not from those big companies. Maybe they were hackers back in the day, and they learned at home, and they maybe took an online course, and they're really adept at figuring things out. And those people are more qualified to that manager because they were able to figure it out. So if something new comes around the corner, they'll be able to figure it out. So same rec, but 2 different managers see it differently. And so you got to know your manager. I always tell people the best recruiters aren't necessarily the ones who find the best candidates, but they're the ones who know their hiring managers best and know how to sell to them. Those, I think, are the better ones.
That's such an interesting note too, because it is in that sort of pitching the candidate, but understanding what that candidate is looking for and what the hiring manager is looking for too. I was given this some thought because the idea of this sort of rub where you are trying to provide a service as a recruiter to a hiring manager, and you've presented your top 3 candidates, and either they're shifting gears or they're not getting back to you, and you have this service level agreement, and you're like, what's going on? And there's a lot of waste in recruitment where you're not getting what you want, or maybe you are. But I think it's a common complaint from recruiters that I hear. And there's that level agreement where you either have it in a contingency role, or you're in a on-site, you're internal. And I think it's different when you're in a contingency role, because they're paying the fee, and so they expect because they have a fee. They want that premium candidate, you know, they want the one who went to the Ivy League school and he was at Google for 5 years or what have you, and he's going to come join my startup. You know, and I think that I could be wrong, but I feel like that might be one of the reasons why that if they're paying the fee, they want that fantastic candidate. And so being able to give them the, okay, you know, the agreement or explanation that they're not going to find this great unicorn. What do you think? Do you think that's probably true?
Yeah, I think it is. And it makes me think about closing a candidate at the time of the intake meeting. And this is what I mean by that. When I'm talking to a hiring manager and they'll say, I want X, I'll say, okay, you say you want X. Y and Z are technologies that are very similar to X. So if I find somebody who's a rock star in Y and Z, although they don't have the X, would you still consider them? And they may go, oh, yeah, okay, maybe. So, okay, so if I find someone who is, you know, 6 years of experience with this, but what if somebody has, you know, 5 years and 2 months? You're not going to like turn them away because they're just a few months short, are you? They'll go, no, okay. So what I do gradually is try to stretch out the net as much as possible and get a good ballpark of it, you know, because if I don't do that, they're going to have a very rigid mindset saying, I asked for 3 years of this and 2 years of that, and this person does not have 3 years of that or 2 years of that. So you're wasting my time, which will drive me and anybody crazy. So in the beginning, I'm like, give me the big, I try to stretch them out to the biggest ballpark as possible. And same thing with the candidate. When I talk to candidates and passive candidates especially, I'll say, okay, so what are you looking for? And they'll say, I want this salary. Okay, so what if the salary was, you know, instead of 100,000, it was really 90,000 or 85,000, but it has really great benefits, you know, which more or less pays for that extra 10 or 15 that you're not getting in salary. Would you consider that? And you mentioned that you have kids, so would you? And then go, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay, I'll think about that. The benefits are really great. And then I just try to stretch some out as much as possible so that by the time I introduce the hiring manager to the candidate, I've ensured, or I'm saying ensured, but I've increased the likelihood of a match because I know the greatest ballpark or the hiring manager will accept. I know the greatest ballpark that a candidate would accept. And somewhere in there they've intersected. So that's why I presented them. And so it increases the chances of me getting a hire from that.
I love the way you phrase this because first and foremost, I think you often hear that when you're doing the intake meeting, you're finding out where all the requirements are and what exactly that they're looking for, and you know how you can meet that mark. But I don't know that I've ever heard of stretching, you know, as an exercise in the intake meeting where you're able to widen the net. And I've certainly heard of like Lou Adler, who is fantastic. I love Lou, who has had what he calls the achiever model, where, you know, you're looking for candidates who've had this success, you know, this record of success and these success stories where maybe they're not doing what you want right now, but they can do that because they have this achiever background or what have you. But in the intake meeting, to be able to establish that stretch and that widening, that's key.
Yeah, and I also would do a bit of a sanity check for myself too with the hiring manager. I'll ask them something like, okay, what will happen if this job is not filled in 3 months? How will that affect the company? And if they say nothing, I said, okay, so it's not really that important, is it? You know, because every rec is so gotta have it now. I say, well, if the company's nothing's gonna happen in 3 months if it's not filled out. Okay, so what are the jobs that if this isn't filled, we're gonna lose some money, or the stock price is gonna dip, or something like that? Tell me those first, and that's how I prioritize. Because I'm not gonna spend 100 days on something and it not get filled and it doesn't matter. So that's my sanity check.
That is brilliant. And for every recruiter or sourcing professional who's listening right now, so key, because you will ask the question, how quickly do you need this position filled? And
yesterday,
right away, right yesterday, hands down. And then you don't hear from them, or like, they have other priorities and they've gone on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
What does your interview schedule look like? Oh, we will start interviewing tomorrow, or first thing on Monday, and then you're emailing them, and then you get that response that they're in Hawaii for the next week.
Exactly.
It's happened to me, but to then take it a step further and say, okay, now if this position weren't filled, say in the next 3 months, then what would happen to your project? What would happen to the company? And really nailing down what that what the effect might be. Oh, that's good. That's good.
And then you have these situations where some managers have like analysis paralysis, where they say this person looks good, but let me just see just one more. And that would see this. These are stories that back when I had hair. See, when I had hair, I was just getting into recruiting, but after so long, things like this happen. So when I deal with managers of analysis paralysis, I do a couple. I may do one of a couple of things. I forget the formula. I have it written down somewhere, but I would calculate how much money the company is losing by that job being open. And if you remind me, I'll look up that formula and send it to you so you can share that. But in at least a few cases, I'll say, okay, I presented a candidate to you on day one, and here we are in month number 3. You haven't made an offer to anybody. This is how much money you have lost based on your not making the decision. And so when you start sharing these numbers like that with the manager or with the manager's boss, especially if you're in a meeting with a bunch of higher ups, and you start telling them in terms of numbers, this is how much money we've lost by this not being open, they're going to either say, 1, hire somebody quick, or 2, do we really need this job? Maybe we should just cut the rec off altogether. Those are the 2 things that generally happen. So yeah, if you remind me, I'll look that formula up because it's very helpful.
Would that be a cost of hire formula?
Yeah.
Almost like a cost of not hiring.
Right? Yeah, more cost of not hiring formula. Yeah.
Wow. So, and then, okay, so this is on the intake meeting. And then you have the candidate when you're doing your first initial reach out to the candidate. And I remember one of the first times I heard somebody say to a candidate when they first got on the phone with them, so what is it that you are looking for as you survey the job market? What's important to you? And kind of diving into what's important to the candidate first. And, and I think being able, like you said, to stretch and to determine what's important to them in the beginning and then kind of stretch that so you can determine if it's a good fit for them. That's also a really key takeaway. Yeah,
and also when engaging a candidate, I'll throw this out there too. A big issue among HR circles, as you probably know, is retention. Everybody's trying to recruit everybody's people, so keeping your people is paramount importance to a lot of HR folks. And so factoring that into candidate engagement, I think, is really important too. So one thing a recruiter may ask a candidate, not necessarily what do they want to do now, but what do you want to do 5 years from now? So they say, 5 years from now, I want to be the VP of technology for company X, for a big company. I said, okay. Well, if you consider this job as a software developer, then you could be in that role for 4 years, and then you become a senior software developer, and another 2 years after that, then you'll be in line to do something else, and then before you know it, you're a VP. So I'm selling them on longevity in the company, saying that, I'm going to help you get your goal, but where you are right now in your goal, I could have these, role A, B, and C available now. But if you stay with us, it's foreseeable that, 6 years time, you could be in this particular place. Now, whether they'll actually stay 6 or 7 years, I don't know. No one really knows. But at least you have in their mind thinking that, okay, this is a company I'm going to stay with for a while. I think, and I wrote about this in one of my articles, companies don't put statistical data on And I understand why they don't do it, because I would be hesitant to do it myself, even though it's my idea. Putting statistical data on a job description saying people who accepted this job became CTO in 8 years or something like that. Because it's so subjective. So many different things happen. Everybody isn't equally talented, even though they may have equal opportunity to apply for the job. But if there were stats that said people who take this job tend to go on to become VPs or chief marketing officers or product managers over X number of years, and that would get the candidate to think, retention, staying with a company for a while. That's one of the things I mentioned in my other book, Retention is New Recruiting, different things like that.
You have a lot of books.
Yeah. Have mouths to feed. So.
How many children do you have?
Well, I have one daughter, but on occasion I have nieces that pop in from time to time. So that's it. Yeah.
Do you cook?
If it comes in a bag and fits in a microwave, yes.
I don't know why. I feel like you would be an awesome cook. You're creative. I feel like you would make a great steak or something.
You know what? Back in the day, I used to be able to cook for myself, so I can eat it. But but cooking for other people to eat, I don't know. Maybe.
So you're an author. Your first book. Tell me, what was the name of your first book?
Wow. The very first book, and this is actually a recruiter tip as well, because it worked out. This was another happy accident. I've had a lot of happy accidents in my career. So the first book I wrote was called How Do I Find a Job When the Economy Sucks? And that was back in 2008, and it was an ebook. And so it was a time of recession. And so a lot of people were laid off at the same time. And so I would interview candidates for Atlanta Technology Group back then. And I would interview people, and they would be hired or not hired, depending on the situation. And then it would say, Jim, you seem like a nice guy. What else can I do? I've talked to you. I posted a monster. I've done these different things. What else can I do to find a job? And I say, there's lots of things you could do. And I would give them tips, And so I found myself repeating myself over and over again. So I said, well, let me just write it all down and put into a Word doc, And then after I interviewed with somebody, and if I couldn't place them, and I pretty much knew I wasn't going to be able to place this guy, I said, okay, you know what? I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming to meet with me. I'm sending you in your email here an ebook I wrote called How to Find a Job When the Economy Sucks, which usually made people laugh, because there was a lot of frustration, people there. And in the book, it had a lot of tips, but also said at the end of the book, it said, hey, my name is Jim. I'm a recruiter for Atlanta Technology Group. And if you're ever looking for a job for a startup company doing technology or doing executive, whatever, look me up, right? And so the happy accident was that I started giving it out to people, and then people started sharing that ebook with other people they knew that were looking for work. And then they would contact me, wanted me to interview them and talk to them about opportunities. And it got to the point that people were emailing me and calling the agency, because I had my phone number in there too, asking for a copy of the book or more advice. I said, you know what, let me just create a website, which was jimstroud.com, which I've had since then, and I posted the book there, and I tell people, hey, just go to jimstroud.com and download the book and share it with whomever you like, And so it just sort of mushroomed from that. And that actually mushroomed into friendships that I still have today. It mushroomed into a lot of business leads because people that I helped either directly or indirectly, when they were in a position to recruit people, they looked me up because they thought they appreciated my altruism in that regard. So all that to say, if you have a free giveaway to give the candidates and build up their goodwill, it'll come back later.
It's like, what? I mean, there's a couple questions I have in
Sure.
that. And number one being, I mean, I guess you're writing screenplays, so you were just kind of always been a writer. Yeah. And,
pretty much.
But writing a book, That's completely different. And did you feel like it flowed easily? Because in the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, 2009, I was at an agency that closed 500 branches throughout the world. Everybody was getting laid off. All of our clients were contacting us saying, we've just laid off hundreds of people here in our headquarters here in Los Angeles. Can you come in and offer advice on how they can find their next position? And it was really it was a very hard time. I mean, we all remember it. And so for you to develop a book and start putting that out there and to develop a network like that, I mean, what a smart thing to do. As you're looking back, I think you know that. But in writing the book, did you have somebody help you do that? How did that evolve?
No, I just scribbled it out there. My mindset was, what can I write that will help people the most? So I made it very, very matter of fact. I may have put a story or a joke or two in there because I believe in entertaining as you inform, because if you entertain on some level, that'll keep people's attention. And if you have their attention, then they'll listen to you, which is why in my presentation, I always try to crack a joke or tell an amusing story in some way. So, no, I just thought, what could help people the most, and how can I make it entertaining? Okay. I remember actually the upgrade of it. It's a book on that one of the books on Amazon. It's called The #1 Job Hunting Book in the World, and it's sort of ballooned from that "How do I find a job when the economy sucks" kind of thing. So I've added a lot more tips to it since then. One of the tips that I have in there, which I freely give because I'm an open book, is not to job hunt on your own. So one thing that I did back then when I was looking for work, and still do from time to time when I'm looking for work, is that I'll team up with people. And how I mean this is that, let's say that I am a cashier at a Kroger, right? I'm looking for another cashier job. So what I will do is I would team up with a bagger, an assistant store manager, a clerk who's stocking up the shelves. These are all people who work at Kroger but don't compete for my job, but understands what I do, like I understand what they do, because we all work together, Yeah. And so I would find people who work on the periphery of what I do, maybe a recruiting coordinator, maybe a trainer, maybe somebody with benefits and compensation, and we're all laid off at the same time. I'll say, okay, let's get together once a week, virtually or in person, and let's make a strategy. I'm going to look for jobs on this job board. You're going to go to this networking event. You're going to go to this church for another networking event or something like that. And we're all spread out. We all look for jobs for ourselves, gather intelligence, come together and share the information that we've had together. That way we've all, depending on how many people in your group, you've expanded your job search by 4 or 5 times without all the extra effort, which is very crucial when you're spending gas driving all over the place, And then once someone scores an interview with a recruiter, then go to the recruiter and say, hey, Miss Recruiter, I know you're looking for someone like me because I'm here in front of you. Can I have 5 more minutes of your time to pitch, 3 or 4 other people to you? Chances are recruiter say, yeah, I'll talk to anybody, So then you send a follow-up email to that recruiter, say, hey, recruiter, it was great talking to you. By the way, as I mentioned, I know 3 or 4 other people that you may want to talk to. I am copying them on this email. And so when your other teammates get that email and see that you send an email introducing them to a recruiter who's actively looking for people at a time, that incentivizes them to do the same thing for you. And so you guys just make a pact that you'll keep doing this for each other until everybody is working. So
that is a brilliant idea. Is this something that you've put into play yourself?
Oh, yes. Yes. And it's interesting. Once you do this a couple times and you stay in touch with everyone, because you sort of like build this bond over hardship, looking for a job, is that once everybody's employed, you then have your own kind of special network. because then you may want to do a business deal with someone and you say, let me call my friend over here at this company who I know will take my call because we've been in the trenches together, and they'll open doors for you and vice versa.
Yeah. I feel like in the last year since I've been developing LAX Tech Recruit and doing this conference and just meeting so many new people and having doors open for me, that sort of giving and opening and introducing people to new people is just, it's just a rewarding and outstanding way to build a great network. So I think that's key. Absolutely.
It all comes back to you. I'm a big pay it forward kind of person.
What is your favorite book that you've written? That you feel like that maybe has benefited you the most or has had the biggest payoff? Is there one in particular that you really liked?
That's tough because they're all my children.
Right? I know. I don't have a favorite.
Well, Resume Forensics has been my most popular one because a lot of sources use that. A lot of recruiting managers buy them in bulk and just drop them at the desk of their sources because it's sort of a really quick and easy read go-to guide. But I think the favorite one is the number one job hunting book in the world because it helps more people because more people are looking for work than there are sourcers. So.
Yeah. So fantastic. So where can we find your books?
They're all on Amazon. So just put Jim Stroud in Amazon and you see all the books there, or you can go to jimstroud.com and find links to them that way as well. Okay.
And then I have this question. So I feel like you can answer or not. There's always so much that you can do in recruitment. And I always feel like there's always different things and ways that you can monetize or make money. Where are some of the ways that you develop or create revenue for you?
In addition to recruiting?
Yeah.
Well, public speaking, speaker fees is one thing. Consulting is another as well. Also the content I produce in terms of the podcast. I mean, there are sponsorship opportunities. So if someone wanted to sponsor my podcast, never met a sponsor I didn't like. So there's that. And so those are things. And actually, if someone is looking for other ways to make money, because I know there's always that in-between time. There are things like Uber and so forth. But there's also this other site that I've come across that I haven't tinkered around with myself, but I'm intrigued by it. It's called clarity.fm, clarity.fm. How it works is you set up a profile like you would on like a Facebook or something like that. And then you say, I am a expert in making bottles, whatever, right? And so then someone will say, I'm looking for someone who can make bottles. And so your profile comes up in the search. They see the phone number to call you, which is actually the Clarity phone number. They call that number. The number calls you. They don't see your phone number. You don't see them. While you're talking, the meter's running. And once you hang up, they will evaluate your advice, 4 or 5 stars, whatever. And then their credit card will be hit with a charge. And then you get your check at the end of the month. You set your rates on how much you want to charge for your advice. And sort of go from there. So you can sort of start your own advice business like in 5 minutes if you so choose. All you gotta do is just get people, look me up on Clarity FM, and pay for my advice.
Advice and mentoring and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have so many avenues of information and knowledge that you can offer. I mean, on the sourcing front, on the consulting front, and I know, like I mentioned before, just you and I just building a presence online with engagement and the type of tools that you would utilize, and the in-depth conversations that you and I have had.
Yep.
So you have a book coming up.
Well, I'm thinking about it. It would be a sequel to Resume Forensics, since that's one of the more popular ones. The first one focused on Google, Bing, and Yahoo, but there are lots of search engines out there. So I was thinking about doing something along those lines. Not really sure yet. Still debating.
You write a lot of articles.
I do.
I'm always interested in, like, one of the top videos that I ever posted. So one of the top posts I ever put was, I think it was on LinkedIn, that got the most hits and most engagements. And there was a question, and the question was, do hiring managers know how to interview? Boom! I got so much,
I bet.
so many responses. It was by far the top engagement I've ever had online. And the second one is, I 10 years ago, I started CTO Roundtable, which were evening mixers for, we'd get 5 chief technology officers, and it would be deep dives into technology. So software engineers would attend. And one of the questions asked was, what's a better degree, engineering or computer science? And so that little snippet video on my YouTube channel was the highest hit one. So
wow.
For you, I'm curious, what are some of your top posts or articles?
Gosh. One of the more popular ones was the I think it was seven, what do they call it? Habits of a Successful Sourcer. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why that was popular because I mixed in poetry and rap music and performing with sourcing. Yeah. So I would sing or rap the responses around how you can source. I'll send you a link to that too if you're a glutton for punishment.
You don't want to reenact it for us?
No. Well, give me a beat. No. No. Well, I'll send you a link to it. I'll send you a link to it.
Oh, I'm posting that. That was awesome. Okay, couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Is there been somebody who has influenced you?
Oh gosh.
You've influenced so many and given so much. Who's influenced you?
Oh my gosh. There's a very long list, and I'm almost hesitant to mention any because I mentioned one. I'll just say 2, although there are several. One is Jerry Crispin, who is the godfather of HR. Dude, he rocks. He's a big inspiration for me. Also, little known, but very influential in my background, Chandra Bodapati. He is the CEO of a company called eGrabber. He's given me a lot of behind-the-scenes advice that has helped me out over the years. So those are 2 top of mind. I could go on. Oh, gosh.
I would like to think.
It's a long list. I'll tell you off camera.
I think that's perfect. I love what you were saying about analysis paralysis earlier because I get that all the time. But last question.
Okay.
What is something that people might not know about you? You share a lot. What is something people might not know about you?
Well, believe it or not, in a much younger, more toned body, I used to work for Chippendales. And yeah. And my job was to clean up after every show. So when the dancers were finished, I would get a mop and just sort of clean up afterwards.
I thought this was going in a different direction. I was like, you're going to get up and do a move for me? You had me. No. You had me.
Let's see. Something that people don't know about me, but my friends know about me, is I'm a big comic book person. I love comic book movies, superhero movies. I grew up on comics. I started off reading Archie comics, then went to Spider-Man and DC and a bunch of other things. So I still read comics to this day. They're a great source of releasing stress, just forgetting about things. So I'm a big comic book person and a big Lenny Kravitz fan. I love Lenny Kravitz. Big fan of his music.
Oh, I like this side of you.
Oh, yeah.
So, do you have
Lenny
a
Kravitz.
collection of comic books that is just off the hook in your house, or do you go someplace
You know
else?
what? I had a few thousand before my house caught on fire earlier on, years ago, and I lost a bunch of them. Now I mostly read them on my iPad, although I do from time to time pick up things like this. Maybe you can read that.
Marvel, yep.
Like an encyclopedia of the Marvel Universe, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And what you can't see from this camera angle is that I have posters in my office to different heroes. Like, see over here, I got what you can't see, but trust me, it's there. Poster of the Black Panther. Poster of Stranger Things, which is an awesome show on Netflix. Daredevil, Star Trek, Captain America, Wonder Woman, several others all around. Just can't see it from this angle. But they're there. And
So,
Doctor Who, which you can see from the back there.
I saw Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a project for you. Okay. So my son has this Ninjago book.
Yeah.
All the Lego characters, and I feel like this is his foray into comic books, if you will. And
Sure.
He likes to go through the characters and, talk about, who their friend is, who their foe is, what their weapon of choice is, and what their superpower is, and just the different details of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this would be really funny, a book for the conference industry, where it's like, these are the characters, and this is what he's passionate about, and this is what his friend is, and his foe is, and he doesn't like water, and his element is fire. That could be a great project for a screenwriting, comic book loving.
Something to think about. That's
Maybe
true.
That's your next book.
Something to think about. You never know. I got the idea now. You never know. You gave me the idea. Who knows?
I was like, this would be very helpful. It'll probably just end up in a Google Doc somewhere on a drive that everybody could share, but I thought it'd be more interesting in like a comic book sort of, speakers of the world.
You never know. You never know. Maybe. I'll think about it.
All right. Well, if people want to find you, Mr. Jim Stroud, do people call you Jimmy?
No. Well, some do.
I saw that somewhere.
Some do.
And I was like, how do I get to the point where I'm calling him Jimmy?
Usually people who generally call me that. We've been friends or connected a long time. So the longer we're connected, the more likely you'll call me that.
All right. Something to look forward to.
Yes. But everybody can find me at jimstroud.com, JIMSTROUD.com. And actually, it's a funny story why I go by Jim Stroud instead of Jimmy. I'll tell you that off camera too.
Okay.
That might be a little.
And everybody can stay tuned after our podcast for outtakes with my call with Jim Stroud. Which, oddly enough, you and I text each other like every week since we met in the summertime. So I feel like we're on the right track to me calling you Jimmy.
You pretty much are. You pretty much are. You're there. You're almost there.
All right, Jim. Well, thank you so much for being on the Tech Recruit podcast. We appreciate it very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. I can see a little bit behind the curtain.
Ah!
So you may want to change that a little bit.
To the wizard behind the curtain.
I am the great and powerful Oz.
All right.
Don't overwork. Okay. Don't overwork it. Don't overthink it. And you can call me Jimmy. You've been to that spot now. You're in the spot.
All right, Jimmy. Have yourself a great day. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.